Hello, Ed here, black tea, red shorts, author of this, Murder by the Bottle, the incredible conscious reordering crime novel now available wherever books are sold. There it is again, just in case you missed it. Okay, so this video, what's it all about, you ask? Well, I get a lot of emails, often asking me, why don't you respond to our emails? And that got me thinking, what if I did? So anyway, let's do that. So I'm going to read out a few and I will respond best I can, all right? This isn't going to happen very often, so don't get used to this. This isn't a regular thing. So let's begin with Rue Boyd, who writes, Dear Ed, I enjoyed your novel very much. It reminded me of myself when I was a debut piece of, dare I say, underrated crime fiction. But there was a flaw. In part 1, you allude to Keir being left-handed, but later, in part 3, his orientation relative to the objects and scene suggests he is right-handed. A contradiction there, I think. Well, no. He's ambidextrous. Jessica Chode writes, Ed, I enjoyed the dinner chapter, dinner at Boondoggle, but I was surprised to read Keir was left alone in the restaurant, presumably left to pay the bill alone. I simply did not believe he would agree to settling the bill without a contribution from Petra. Perhaps if he'd asked for half in the next chapter, then I think it would have been plausible, but he didn't. As the novel progressed, I found myself angry about this and any of Keir's crimes, or indeed the ontological questions raised in the closing postscript. What's your view on bill splitting? I think the woman should always pay. So, Felix Roundhouse writes, Dear Mr. Whitfield. Good, like that, bit of respect. Important. You make me wish a meteor would come and wipe out existence. You're worse than E.L. James, you vacuous bag of fish guts. No one gives a shit about your stupid story. You make me weep for society, that a mouth-breathing idiot such as you has any right to write, still R-I-G-H-T, anything other than a cheque compensating readers for their wasted time. I wish nothing but the worst for you and any relative you may have. Okay, well, I have a few relatives that deserve your contempt, Felix, but I can't say which, of course. Amy Huell writes, Ed, I'd like to see your internet history. Well, I'm writing it now, Amy. It starts with the CIA, continues through Tim Berners-Lee. Martin Amis writes, Edward. The theme of town and country in your novel was most acute. It made me recall a simply awful week I once spent in New Haven. I was in a Pinterest townhouse with a cast of characters that would have stewed Kingsley's Dunkers. A dreadful man in the adjoining room, so rancid he had his own atmosphere, had a habit of bolting upright in the early hours, screaming, You will not take me, you will not make me yield. At breakfast, the owner of the guest house and Mrs. Moran, though moron would altogether have been more apt, suggested I may want to see the town's harbour, as this was allegedly where Lord Lucan leapt to his death when on the run. He would not be there any more, she said, as this was 40 years ago, but I could still see the ocean he'd have fallen into. Don't you find seaside towns are full of such people? People that talk to you or have some memorable characteristic. One craves the anonymity of the city and the taming of nature, bar elements that elements that no geography can control, such as gluttony and bestiality. Yeah, okay. Remy Martin asks, Ed, with hindsight, do you think murder is a suitable topic for a novel? There are plenty of real murders, and they're very upsetting. Do we really need to read about fictional ones? Isn't that just a waste of everybody's time? Well, Remy, see, it's my view that the role of fiction is to reflect the world as it is, not as we would wish it to be. Of course, murder is the ultimate social taboo, the ultimate act of degeneracy and deviance. It's a very interesting thing from a psychological point of view, and murderers, of course, who are unbound by all the constraints that regulate the behaviour of you and I, things like religion, law, social convention, that kind of thing, the judgment of one's peers, all those sorts of things. None of that stops them, and for that reason they're very, very interesting people. I'm interested in interesting people, people unlike myself. Of course, I could never hurt another human being. I couldn't harm a fly. So, of course, I'm naturally very interested in people who could and would, maybe even think the people involved deserved it. I think they're very interesting. So did you. You read about it. Think about that before you write in again. Joe Swash writes, Dear Sir, Keir uses a lot of big words in your story. Is it necessary to use the character's vocabulary? I had to look up vocabulary, by the way. When he does it, doesn't it exclude all the readers who aren't your character? Well, Joe, that would be everyone, wouldn't it? That'd be everyone in the world. Think. Millicent Bowden Granger writes, your novel was a read, no question about that. However, I've written a book entitled Bottled Murder, about a woman who finds a way to distill homicidal feelings into a sweet liqueur that can be sold on the open market. I'm worried that your novel might be bought instead of mine because the titles are so very similar. Funny, we both thought of murder and alcoholic beverages being linked. Do you think anyone else has ever made this connection between drinking and violence? Well, Millicent, no, I don't think so. But you see, it's one of those things, once you say it, it's obvious, isn't it? But it took somebody to state the obvious. Delroy Zaffa writes, Ed, might the conclusion of your novel be men and women shouldn't work together? Well, Delroy, look, if you can give me one example of where men and women sharing the same workspace has led to any kind of conflict or lack of understanding, then maybe I would accept that point. But I in my own working life, and I suspect in yours, there are none. Okay? And if you think about it, there's absolutely no reason why people of different sexes, if I can put it that way, should therefore experience any kind of gendered conflict at work. I can't see why that would happen. And finally, Keir Rothwell writes, Mr. Whitfield, I read in an interview that your entire book is based on a piece of bus stop graffiti, and the legend Keir Rothwell is gay. Well, guess what? I realised that I was living a few hundred yards from that bus stop in the mid-90s, and I believed the Keir in question was me. But it was not, in fact, graffiti at all. I wrote it myself the day I came out. It was a loud and proud affirmation of my fully realised free and fancy sexuality, scribbled hours after I told my parents, who hugged their 16-year-old boy, that's me, and proclaimed their heart-bursting pride in my courage and fully ripe identity. It was, without question, the happiest day of my life. It was the day I became myself, the day I stopped being afraid. So imagine how I felt 20 years later when I read this statement of joy being appropriated by a straight man as a piece of homophobic abuse And from this imaginary slight, an entire persecuted character being created, which, when committed to print, became quite possibly one of the worst human beings I've ever encountered in fiction. A cruel, sadistic narcissist who ruins lives and makes a mockery of the freedom of expression associated with art. From my best day, you've made a monster, a psycho that people now, having read your interview, associate with me. Consequently, you will be hearing from my lawyers very soon. Your novel has effectively stolen my identity and reversed all the gains I've made as an adult. Well, Keir, all I can say is thank you so much for the inspiration and thanks for reading. I really appreciate it. So that's it for now. And look, kids, if you want to ask me something about this incredible work of fiction, that's Murder by the Bottle by Ed Whitfield, that's me, then you can send me something on the Twitter at Ed Whitfield, or you can email me murderbythebottle@murderbythebottle.book. I can't wait to read those. So until then, happy reading. Don't be the only person who hasn't read Murder by the Bottle. You'd look like an absolute moron. Go and read it. Thank you very much. Goodbye.